You didn't discover Google. You didn't choose it. It simply appeared. Already finished. Already trusted. Already everywhere. Before you formed your first serious opinion, before you understood how the world works, Google was already deciding what you would see and what you never would. How did a quiet research project built by two graduate students become the invisible gatekeeper of human knowledge? How did a tool meant to help people search slowly become the system that defines what is worth finding? And why did the world hand over its curiosity, its questions, and eventually its thinking to a machine it barely understands? This is not a story about technology. This is a story about trust, about power that doesn't announce itself, about an empire that doesn't conquer land, but quietly occupies the human mind. This is Google. In the early days of the internet, nothing made sense. The web was not intelligent. It was loud. Millions of pages existed, but no one knew which ones mattered. People were drowning in information and starving for meaning. At Stanford University, Larry Page felt uncomfortable with chaos. He believed the world made sense if you looked at it the right way. Sergey Brin was different. He loved complexity, patterns, hidden connections. Where others saw disorder, they saw structure waiting to be revealed. They didn't want to create content. They wanted to map importance itself, not opinions, not authority, but relevance. And that single idea would quietly change the future of humanity. Here was their belief, simple, elegant, and deeply dangerous. What if truth could be ranked? What if importance was not human judgment, but mathematical probability? What if the collective behavior of people could decide what deserved attention? This wasn't just engineering. It was philosophy disguised as code. Because the moment you rank information, you influence behavior. And the moment people trust those rankings, you stop reflecting reality. You start shaping it. Google didn't want to tell people what to think, but it wanted to decide what people think about. That difference would later change everything. PageRank worked. Suddenly, the internet felt calm, useful, ordered. Google's results felt right. People stopped questioning. They started trusting. Advertisers noticed. Investors noticed. Governments quietly noticed. But the most important shift was invisible. People stopped searching the web. They started searching Google. The question was no longer, where should I look? It became, what does Google show first? Something subtle was happening. Every search trained the user. Every click rewarded the system. Google wasn't just learning from humans. Humans were learning how to think through Google. Shorter questions, faster answers, less patience. Why explore when the first result feels good enough? Why doubt when the top link feels official? Without resistance, human curiosity began adapting to machine logic. Google didn't force behavior. It gently optimized it. And optimized minds are the easiest to guide. At this stage, Google still looked harmless. No scandals, no outrage, no fear, just clean design, fast answers, and a quiet promise to make life easier. But ease always has a cost, because the more friction you remove from thinking, the more dependent thinking becomes. And dependence is the foundation of every empire. Google told the world to be patient, to trust the process, to let the algorithm work, and the world agreed. But patience gave Google something priceless: time. Time to expand, time to watch, time to learn humanity better than humanity knows itself. And soon, Google would stop organizing information and begin organizing people. Google never asked you for money. It asked for something far more valuable: your attention, Email, maps, documents, videos, all free. No contracts, no subscriptions, no obvious price. And that made people comfortable. Because when something costs nothing, we stop asking why it exists. Behind the clean interface, a translation was happening. Your searches became signals. Your clicks became preferences. Your pauses became intentions. Google learned to translate human behavior into predictions, not who you are, but what you are likely to do next. And advertisers didn't want people. They wanted outcomes. Google promised both. At first, data felt harmless. After all, it was anonymous, aggregated, statistical. But patterns don't need names. Google didn't know you personally. It knew you probabilistically. And probability is often more powerful than identity because it doesn't explain you, it anticipates you. The system wasn't watching you, it was predicting you. Here's the loop no one noticed. You search, Google answers, you click, Google learns. Then Google subtly adjusts what it shows next time. Not to control you, but to improve engagement. But engagement rewards familiarity, and familiarity narrows perspective. Over time, the world begins to feel smaller, more predictable, more agreeable. Not because reality changed, but because your window into it did. Relevance feels good. It feels like the system understands you. But relevance also filters out surprise, contradiction, discomfort, and growth rarely lives there. When algorithms optimize comfort, they slowly remove friction. And friction is where critical thinking lives. Google didn't just train individuals, it trained institutions. Journalists learned to write for search. Businesses learned to design for ranking. Governments learned to communicate through platforms. Visibility became currency, and Google controlled the exchange rate, not by force, but by architecture. At some point, something changed. People stopped asking, "What do I believe?" They started asking, "What does Google show?" Authority quietly moved from humans to machines, and no one voted on it. By the time the world realized how dependent it had become, Google was no longer a service. It was infrastructure, and questioning infrastructure feels like questioning reality itself. But the real transformation was still ahead, because soon, Google wouldn't just predict behavior, it would begin to shape it. There was a moment when Google stopped being optional, not announced, not declared. It simply happened. Search was no longer a feature, it was a reflex. Maps were no longer guidance, they were authority. Email wasn't communication anymore, it was identity. Google wasn't a destination on the internet, it was the internet's nervous system. And systems like that don't compete, they absorb. Competition didn't disappear, it suffocated. Search engines tried to catch up, browsers tried to resist, platforms tried to stay independent. But Google didn't fight them head-on. It surrounded them. Android controlled the pocket. Chrome controlled the window. YouTube controlled attention. Maps controlled movement. Individually, they felt harmless. Together, they formed a closed loop around modern life. You didn't have to choose Google. You simply had to exist. Google never removed choice. It perfected something far more effective, making alternatives feel unnecessary. Why switch search engines when this one already knows you? Why use another map when this one remembers your habits? Why question recommendations when they feel personalized? Control didn't arrive as restriction, it arrived as convenience. And convenience is the most persuasive force in human history. For years, Google claimed neutrality. Algorithms don't judge, they said. They only reflect reality. But algorithms are trained, and training always carries values. Every tweak, every optimization, every update. decided what deserves attention and what fades into silence. Neutrality didn't vanish overnight. It eroded, quietly, logically, invisibly. Entire industries adapted. Newsrooms optimized headlines. Creators optimized thumbnails. Businesses optimized keywords. Truth didn't disappear. It competed. And competition favors speed over depth, emotion over nuance, reaction over reflection. Google didn't invent this shift, but it scaled it to a global default. Here's the unsettling part. There was no dictator, no single decision maker. Just systems optimizing metrics, no villain to protest, no throne to overthrow. Power without a face is the hardest kind to resist, because you can't argue with an interface. Then came the questions about bias, about influence, about manipulation. Governments began asking who controls information. Societies began asking who decides visibility. Google responded calmly, with reports, with statements, with assurances. But once trust fractures, it never fully heals. Google had become too big to ignore, too influential to remain unquestioned, and too essential to be easily changed. The world had built itself on top of an invisible system, and now it wanted accountability. But accountability threatens optimization, and optimization is what Google was built to protect. The next phase wouldn't be about growth, it would be about survival. At some point, every empire reaches a moment it can no longer optimize its way out of. For Google, that moment arrived quietly, not with a collapse, not with a scandal that ended everything, but with questions that refused to go away. Who decides what people see? Who defines relevance? And who is responsible when invisible systems shape visible lives? Governments tried to respond. Hearings were held. Reports were written. Fines were issued. But laws move slowly, and algorithms move at the speed of feedback. By the time regulators understood one system, Google had already optimized the next, not out of malice, out of momentum, because once a system becomes essential, stopping feels irresponsible, even when continuing feels dangerous. Here is the part rarely measured. When answers come too easily, questions lose depth. When navigation is perfect, intuition weakens. When memory is outsourced, attention fragments. Google didn't make humans less intelligent. It made intelligence more efficient. And efficiency always trades something away. Usually, it trades patience, reflection, and the space where wisdom grows. Google insists it does not control outcomes, only probabilities. But probabilities shape behavior, and behavior shapes culture. When suggestions feel neutral, we stop questioning them. When systems feel inevitable, we stop imagining alternatives. The future doesn't need to be decided by force if it can be guided by convenience. The world still trusts Google, not blindly, but practically, because trust isn't always belief. Sometimes it's habit, and habits are harder to break than convictions. We know the system has flaws. We know power concentrates. We know dependence carries risk. And yet, we keep searching. One day, Google will no longer be the center. All empires fade, but the legacy will remain. A world where information is ranked, where visibility is negotiated with machines, where reality arrives pre-filtered. Future systems will learn from Google, not just how to organize knowledge, but how to organize humanity. Every empire begins with a solution, something broken, something chaotic, something in need of order. But every solution eventually asks a question. What happens when the system meant to help us think becomes the system that thinks for us? And if we no longer choose what we see, can we truly choose who we become? Google never told the world what to believe. It simply decided what the world would notice. And that may be the most powerful form of control ever created. Because the next empire won't announce itself. It will feel helpful. It will feel familiar. And it might already be listening to what you search for next.